Welcome back, Mitochondriacs. I've got a pretty exciting video to share with you guys today. In particular, kind of wrapping up the glutamine saga, at least of what I can find right now. Interestingly enough, someone actually posted in the comments a paper that I'm guessing is from the same group that I missed that I may have to present later. But in general, I've got some pretty good information to share today. So let me see if I can pull everything up and we can get started. Okay, I'm going to start here. Yeah, so I actually accidentally put a picture of rosemary, but and I'm sure rosmarinic acid actually does have some anti-cancer properties, and some of which maybe have activity against glutamine. But I meant to put it against another plant, and that was my fault. Is it more epic than we thought? I hope so. I really hope so. I mean, honestly, like if you have compounds that are natural that have stronger activity than Dawn against the glutaminase enzyme, I mean, I think that's pretty epic, right? Okay, let's see if I can find what I'm looking for here. All right. Share. So I have been trying to present by looking at the slides, but what I'm seeing is that it's a little distracting, the comments on the right side of my screen here, but you guys are able to tell me firsthand if I like lose my slides, if it gets disconnected. So I think I'm going to probably present from here. So the first kind of update to the glutaminolysis system that I would like to share is one about quercetin. And I think that I have kind of an unofficial favorites list of compounds that have anti-cancer activity. And I want to say that quercetin has got to be probably in my top 3 or 4 because it has so many different biologic activities against cancer. And so we have talked about quercetin so far kind of only from one perspective, and that is its activity on glutamine uptake. But I was able to, with the help of one of the audience members, find this paper here, which was able to show that quercetin has activity on the glutamine dehydrogenase enzyme, which is the same enzyme that is blocked by EGCG. And it's interesting because what they were able to do by doing a gene silencing of this glutamine dehydrogenase 1 enzyme in these hepatocellular carcinoma cells is that they reduced proliferation immediately by nearly 60%, which just goes to show how important glutamine and glutamate is to the cancer cells, right? It decreased mitochondrial mass as well as membrane potential and had a significant increase in superanion formation. And, we haven't had a chance to do a deep dive into mitochondrial redox, although it's definitely slated to be presented at some point. And superanion is one of the reactive oxygen species that is very powerful. And when you release a lot of superanion or reactive oxygen species, that can trigger apoptosis within the cell because it has kind of catastrophic effects on those mitochondria. So this is pretty cool. Just chalk it up for another, mechanism of action that quercetin has, and definitely like supports being one of my favorite flavonoids, anti-cancer flavonoids for sure. So I thought this was an interesting graph because what it's showing here is that here, let's say this is the viability and the glutamine dehydrogenase activity with nothing added, right? Now, I'll give my critique of this in a second, but my point is that we have quercetin, we have this PAA, and we have EGCG. And just to go back, what is PAA? It stands for permethylated angiopressin A. And I'm not actually sure what that is, but I don't think it's going to be something that we're going to have access to. So, but quercetin we have readily have access to. So, and we know EGCG from green tea. So we have varying concentrations of these compounds, and we see that although, let's say at kind of the maximum concentration here at 16 micromolar, we see that quercetin has a significant, more than probably like a 75% decrease in GDH1 activity. Still, EGCG is more powerful. I mean, it's clearly more powerful. And even at much less concentrations. As a matter of fact, the equal concentrations would be like, it's about fourfold stronger, it looks like, because at 4 micromolar, you're getting about equal decreases in activity. And my critique of the paper, of course, is why didn't you do a paper where you have quercetin plus EGCG and seeing the synergistic activities? But they didn't do it, and we don't have that information. But I would guess that there is some nice synergy between quercetin and EGCG. And just to, show where we're talking about here on our kind of classic graph. So this is where we talked about in a prior video where quercetin has activity in this SLC1A5 glutamine uptake channel. And quercetin, as well as many other things, have activity on that channel. But that being said, glutamine dehydrogenase, again, where EGCG has been shown to work, is also where quercetin has activity. And again, not quite as strongly as EGCG, but there could be some nice synergy because unlike EGCG, quercetin blocks glutamine as well as many other important pathways that makes cancer cells viable. So I hope that is somewhat empowering. And then let's see here. The next thing I wanted to cover was curcumin. And again, we had covered curcumin already when it came to other pathways, but I wanted to cover it here. So I'm actually going to get rid of that. So curcumin, it says here that curcumin has been long used in Chinese herbal medicine for, I don't know if it's actually been used in Chinese herbal medicine. I would say definitely like Ayurvedic medicine because it comes from India, but it may be used in Chinese systems as well. I'm not aware of that. There's a treatment of chronic liver disease, and curcumol is its main active ingredient. And it says this study explores the molecular mechanism of curcumol regulating glutamine metabolism, hoping to provide new ideas for the prevention and treatment of chronic liver diseases in this case, but we're obviously going to use it for a different purpose, for cancer. So the results say that curcumol significantly inhibited cell proliferation, glutamine metabolism, GLS1, and extracellular matrix expression, and promoted cell senescence. So we had talked about curcumin, and curcumin is also one of these like unbelievable compounds that block like 50 different things, and it's just almost too good to be true. But curcumin we talked about in the past when it was blocking this LAD2 glutamine uptake channel, and it's kind of one of the more obscure ones that I was able to find. It's not one of the kind of classic ones we see on this graphic here, but it's another glutamine channel that curcumin has activity against. So it definitely helps against glutamine uptake. But in addition to that, it also has, oops, I guess maybe I needed that. It also has activity against this GLS enzyme that we've seen where Dawn blocks, and some of the other compounds we'll be talking about a little bit later today. I wanted to show on this graph if I could, but it doesn't have the channel. So maybe if you had like another channel here, this LAD2. So it blocks glutamine uptake as well as glutamine utilization through the GLS enzyme. And from what I can understand from reading the paper, because I want to say this was not available with the full text, I think that they're saying that maybe it downregulates the expression of GLS, similar to how vitamin D works. Vitamin D doesn't necessarily block GLS enzyme. or even some of the enzyme transporters like SLC1A5, it downregulates their expression at the genetic level. So there's not as much available for use. Hello, everyone, actually. Got a lot of good mornings here. Good morning from me to you guys as well. So the next kind of update I wanted to give was about berberine. And berberine, again, we had talked about it previously in a prior video. I think it was maybe the same video as curcumin, where we were talking about how it affects SLC1A5, which is, again, a glutamine uptake channel. It's SLC1A5 here. And we're seeing here that in this paper, it shows that it also decreases the expression of GLS, similar to vitamin D, similar to how curcumin worked in the prior study. Likely is it's decreasing the available protein so that glutamine cannot get converted into glutamate and further used in the system. And probably one of the most important mechanisms of why GLS is so critical is because glutamate is one of the 3 amino acids that make up glutathione, and glutathione is highly upregulated in cancer cells so that they can have kind of like this shield-like protection against reactive oxygen species. And essentially by lowering glucose or glutamine uptake as well as glutamine utilization, then we're going to allow for ferroptosis to be much more likely to happen because of their loss of their protection. And again, just showing where this is located on the graph, we have SLC1A5, which is what we showed in a prior video of berberine having activity against. But it looks like that berberine also has activity against this GLS enzyme. Again, exactly the same spot where DAWN works upon. And we don't have a graph like this of how strong of an activity both curcumin or how strong this berberine works, in terms of its effects on GLS. I would say it probably wouldn't be an apples to apples, just because it seems that EGCG and quercetin actually has direct inhibitory effects on the enzyme itself, whereas vitamin D, whereas curcumin and berberine actually have a down regulatory effects. So the way you'd probably look at that, you'd probably look at you'd see GDH, gene expression percent. You'd say, okay, the cancer cells has 100%. And then you'd see okay, you add vitamin D, you add curcumin, you add, whatever else compound that actually has inhibitory effects on the expression of this. Well, we're talking about GSH, but you get my point. And we'd see, well, how much of an expression decrease do we have? And we can see the strength of those compounds based off of those kind of a study like that. Good morning, everyone. I took 100 grams. Yeah, so I took 100 grams of L-glutamine powder every day for 4 years with mebendazole and cimetidine tablets. The recommended dosage of L-glutamine is 5 grams. Yeah, I don't know what the recommended glutamine is depending on the different pathologies people have. We use quite a bit higher doses for people who have, like leaky gut syndrome and stuff like that within functional medicine. I mean, I've seen upwards of 25 grams per day. I don't think I've ever seen people take 100 grams per day. Probably mostly because of cost. That would be very expensive, I can imagine. And then for more traditional, fitness type things, people would take 10 grams per day. What I've seen, maybe in split dosing. Yeah, I know. I'd heard about your story, my friend. I don't know exactly your story, and I think much like Dr. Seyfried, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. But I'm just happy you're healthy. I would say that maybe what would have happened there was that the mebendazole was blocking the glutamine. It would block the GLS enzyme. So somehow, your normal cells maybe potentially were getting made stronger, while the cancer cells were being blocked at the level where they needed it the most. I'm not sure. I mean, I'd like to maybe know more about your story to be able to further try to explain it. I think the explanation that I'd heard from someone else that said like, oh, well, no one can explain it, so therefore I think we have to try to look at it and study it and figure out why. Like I want to learn, and I'm glad you're healthy, so that's pretty cool. All right, so I'm going to go back to the slide deck here because I want to. We talked about quercetin. We talked about that. All right, so let's talk about some new stuff here. So Thymus vulgaris, or our thyme herb that you would take on a variety of foods, has been, we use it in a lot of different areas of functional medicine, believe it or not. We use it to help with like kind of like bacterial overgrowth syndromes like dysbiosis. It probably has some like fungal activity as well, antifungal activity. And it's thymol is used in a lot of different kind of infectious disease type things as well. So that there's kind of like some innate power to thyme or Thymus vulgaris. And I wanted to bring up this because I'm not actually going to talk about thymol, but I thought this was an interesting study to kind of like get us a little bit of a beginning to talking about thyme. And so this is talking about thymol, and it's talking about how the administration of the thyme essential oil led to early formation of intracellular ROS, or reactive oxygen species, followed by an increment of MDA, which is malondialdehyde, which is a marker of oxidative stress of DNA damage, actually, and lipid peroxidation, and as an index of lipid peroxidation by the decreased expression of antioxidant enzymes, catalase, and PON2. And this is a pretty cool graphic because it's talking about triple negative breast cancer cells, which, ER negative, PR negative, and HER2 negative breast cancer cells, which is really not a great situation for people to be in general, because, the conventional approaches to breast cancers are, other than surgery and radiation, would be to use something like, an estrogen blockade inhibitor or an aromatase inhibitors that can help lower, insulin signaling, or not insulin, estrogen signaling or estrogen creation, right? And then of course there's like the Herceptin and the Herceptin-like medications that are like the HER2/neu inhibitors. And so if you have a triple negative situation, mainstream medicine, other than surgery and radiation, doesn't have a lot to effect for you, right? Doesn't have a lot to offer you other than maybe conventional chemotherapy. So in this case, they're using thyme and essential oil. And you can see that this particular oil has thymol, which is nearly 50%, and it has some other these triterpenes, as well as the other one that's fairly well known is this carvacol. Anyway, I'll digress. And what they were looking at is like, what kind of effects did this compound have on these cancer cells, these triple negative breast cancer cells? And I'm not going to go over every single one of them, but I wanted to give some, I think, some important ones. So it increased P53. It decreased hypoxia-inducible factor. Remember, hypoxia-inducible factor is like one of the main important chemicals that can drive the Warburg effect. It will upregulate glucose machinery as well as glutamine machinery, and it works through hypoxia and pseudohypoxia. But I thought was interesting was that it actually increased ROS, increased MDA, decreased catalase, and these oxidative stress kind of markers. And generally when we think about these compounds, these plant compounds, it's very fascinating because it has, and I'll show a little bit later down on another compound, but it has like an opposite effect within normal cells that it has in cancer cells. Like in the normal cells, like I think I have to look back on my slide deck on another, like a whole other presentation about mitochondrial redox, but I'm pretty sure that thymol and thyme can actually increase NRF2, and it says it here, but it doesn't make sense for in cancer cells, but it increases NRF2, which NRF2, if you know anything about the antioxidant response system, it like robustly increase our ability to handle oxidative stress. But in these cancer cells, it's actually increasing oxidative stress, it's decreasing catalase, and it's actually making these cancer cells more susceptible to oxidative stress. So I think that's pretty neat. that these natural compounds have like an almost 180 effect. And you'll see this over and over and over again. Vitamin D, melatonin, curcumin, all these other things have like an opposite effect within cancer cells than they have within the normal cells, which makes me really hopeful, because a lot of people, they see Dr. Seyfried's press pulse protocol, right? And they're like, get a pulse glutamine inhibitors. And I agree with that when they're medications. But that being said, most people who are kind of interested in the integrative kind of functional space have been on fairly high doses of curcumin or quercetin or a lot of other things, EGCG, for months on end, right? And they don't see like the negative effects that you would expect, like that if you were to give Dawn at high doses every day, right? If you give Dawn high dose every day, you're going to have like massive side effects, likely, gastrointestinal side effects, potentially immune side effects, as well as other things. And so my point is that it seems like these natural compounds, although they don't have quite as strong as an effect in a lot of cases against these targets, they seem to have more of a nuanced and gentle approach on the body as a whole, instead of just a sledgehammer, one target, one problem. Doesn't matter if it's a healthy cell or normal cell, kind of like chemotherapy is. And I think that would be pretty cool. Yeah. So just a couple of things. I look forward to you contacting me after Christmas, Shane and John. And a couple other things. Can they already have on a basic level too many antioxidants are bad for pro-oxidative stress therapies? Yeah. So this is a great question, and I'm sure that I've covered it on multiple videos, but I want to maybe reiterate here, okay? Because this is a very difficult topic for people to understand. So there is something called reductive stress, where you have actually too many antioxidants. That's actually a problem. And if you have too little antioxidants and too much oxidative stress, too much oxidation going on, that's called oxidative stress. And both of those are actually bad. Okay. And what I would say is that you're always trying to find the delicate balance, right? And I don't think we as humans can really like figure that out on our own. The body can figure it out. And we can use, markers like MDA, like, other oxidative stress markers to figure out if there's too much going on. But the bottom line is yes. And as a matter of fact, what I would say is that cancer cells, because they come from us, remember, they have basically hijacked some of our most important pathways. So, NRF2 is a great pathway to be looking at trying to stimulate and upregulate, potentially, not too much, but upregulating as a way to help prevent serious illnesses. But that being said, the cancer cells will actually upregulate NRF2 and other antioxidant systems like way higher than a normal cell would, as a way to protect themselves against themselves, because there's a lot of RS going on in a cancer cell, but also to protect themselves against oxidative therapies. So that's why I personally, I am very careful about having people take antioxidants when they have cancer, because you could be hurting yourself and also hurting the therapies as a whole. Like, this is a great example. Like, but obviously we don't know everything, right? Because if that was the case, then why would, Shane and John's cancer gone away with taking, 100 grams of glutamine a day? That's a crazy amount of glutamine. The only thing I can think of is that we're blocking the pathways that we need to, that cancer cells rely on, and that glutamine's not getting into the cancer cells or whatnot. I think it's a great case study to try to figure out what's going on there. But that being said, I wanted to set this up because what I wanted to show next was same plant, different compounds. We're talking about betulinic acid and oleic acid. And in this case, they looked at 3 different compounds, and they found that compound 2, which is this betulinic acid, the first compound was uracilic acid, but betulinic acid was the one that they showed that it shows that it is significantly inhibited glutaminase activity with stronger than the positive control. And the control they used for this particular study was the Dawn medication, or the 6-diazo 5-oxo L-norleucine, which is classically referred to as the gold standard of glutaminase inhibition. And you see that it took DON nearly double the amount of DON to affect the glutaminase enzyme the same, right? To lower it by 50% activity. It took 0.31 millimoles, and it took DON 0.57 millimoles. So nearly double, nearly twice as strong, I guess you'd say, at decreasing activity of the glutaminase enzyme. And just so we're all on the same page, betulinic acid would be working against this glutaminase enzyme. And this is, again, of critical importance because when glutamine is converted to glutamate, that's when glutamate can be converted into glutathione, GSH, right? Glutamate is what's used to make glutathione. And glutamate then is further converted into alpha-ketoglutarate through the glutamine dehydrogenase enzyme to actually participate in the biosynthesis of amino acids, of lipids, of nucleic acids, etc. And so when we block that, again, just because I think this is an interesting case study, because membendazole also blocks GLS, was the glutamine that was getting in just affecting the normal cells and empowering the normal cells, empowering the immune system, and then the membendazole was blocking this enzyme to a significant amount enough to actually decrease glutathione synthesis and allow, healing to occur. I mean, honestly, I think this should be studied because, maybe in those kind of cases, we could have our cake and eat it too, right? We could actually have glutamine not be necessarily super restricted from the diet and still be able to, affect the glutaminolysis system. The next compound I wanted to talk about was this Diospyros khaki. And I'll be honest, I had to look that one up because I have never heard of that one. Now, when I was able to actually Google it basically and figure out that it's just a Chinese persimmon, then it didn't seem so exotic. But that being said, this is a paper that is looking at the Chinese persimmon or the Diospyros khaki. And what it says here that experiments have shown that flavonoids from extracts of the leaves, not the plant itself, I think the actual fruit of itself, that would make it a little more problematic because you get the anti-cancer effects, but then you're getting probably a big, fructose load, which may not be in line with the metabolic therapy as a whole. But if it's a leaf, then obviously there's not going to be an issue there. And it says have a variety of good pharmacologic activities which could activate oxidative stress and mitochondrial apoptosis, inhibit the proliferation of human prostate cancer cells, and induce apoptosis. It could also achieve the anti-cancer effect of cell proliferation and induce apoptosis by regulating oxidative stress. So again, this is a great example of how you see here how it says here that this same plant is regulating oxidative stress. So you're seeing that for the brain, it's protective. It's actually decreasing oxidative stress. For the liver, it's decreasing oxidative stress. And for, let's say for the same thing, for kidney damage or for other things, but then for I meant to say liver cancer, it's actually having, you see, it's very small print, but it says against, right? So it's actually upregulating oxidative stress and the mitochondrial apoptotic pathway. And I think this is brings me to a larger point, is that I've had a couple people ask me, and it's a great question. Why would you want to increase mitochondrial activity for cancer cells? Would that not harm our situation here? And again, I'm going to try to use a slide to demonstrate what I want to show here. And I think that I'm getting warmer here. Stand by. I got a lot of slides, if you can imagine. I know I'll know it when I see it. Okay, so this is the one I wanted to show. Okay, so if you remember back from the DCA video, dichloroacetate, what does DCA effectively do? DCA takes the brake off of PDH. Okay, PDH stands for pyruvate dehydrogenase complex, or pyruvate dehydrogenase, and that is what takes pyruvate and puts it into the mitochondria and turns it into acetyl-CoA. Okay, and acetyl-CoA participates in the TCA cycle and ultimately runs the intermediates of NADH and FADH2 through the electron transport chain and then creates ATP in a normal cell, right? In a normal mitochondria. But what happens is twofold. Number one, when we inhibit PDK and ultimately relieve PDH to allow pyruvate into the mitochondria, we are now decreasing the functional amount of lactate available. Okay, now it's a source of pseudohypoxia as well as an inhibitor of our immune system, right? And therapies, right? Chemotherapies, etc. But more importantly, we're running more electrons through a broken mitochondria. We know functionally that the mitochondria are damaged in cancer cells. And I don't dare go back to the Seafried slide that shows that, although I may have it on hand sooner than I thought. So remember, the cancer mitochondria are like vacuolated. They don't have cristae, and there's a bunch more reactive oxygen species made in these kind of cancer mitochondria, which is, I believe, this is my belief. My belief is that the Warburg effect is actually and the activation of PDK, okay, and blocking pyruvate getting into the mitochondria is actually a protective effect against this exact mechanism for cancer cells. Let me see if I can break this down. So cancer cells, they ferment, right? We know they ferment. That lactate helps protect them. That lactate helps protect them against chemotherapy as well as our immune system. And it also kind of feeds forward this mechanism. It also, if pyruvate was to get into these broken mitochondria, it would produce a bunch of reactive oxygen species, which then can cause DNA damage and cause cell death. Okay, this reactive oxygen species will also damage further the mitochondria and eject cytochrome C from the mitochondria, which will also unlock apoptosis. So this is the same compound, PDK, PDH, and dichloroacetate. And you see how it says that it increases apoptosis because we're basically running electrons through a broken electron transport chain. We increase reactive oxygen species, and we actually unlock apoptosis, which is blocked. Okay, so I believe that cancer cells are inhibiting this reaction here to forward feed their mechanisms of unlimited growth and immune kind of down regulation and immune escape, but it also will protect itself against apoptosis. So it basically it stops apoptosis through a major mechanism through this way. And what I'd also say is that I'm not going to look for this slide, I promise you, because I have no idea where it's at in this slide deck. What I would say is that it also acetyl-CoA is how you make melatonin inside normal cells, right? And so by decreasing the acetyl-CoA available, then the cancer cells can't make melatonin, and we know that melatonin is exceedingly anti-cancer. So I think it's like a quadruple whammy of why cancer cells would not want this enzyme to actually be effective, and why, although confusing, I don't disagree. It makes sense why by unlocking this enzyme here, we would actually increase ROS and basically terminally damage these mitochondria, which would actually unlock apoptosis and actually would kill cancer cells. So I hope that makes some sense of why restoring, kind of like normal mitochondrial energy flux would actually be important. Let me see if I can look at some of these comments real fast. Do need natural substances to increase immune cell count naturally? So I don't know if I can say that I know anything that, as of off the top of my head, that can increase immune cell count naturally, but some of the medicinal mushrooms and herbs from Chinese medicine can definitely like increase natural killer cell function, as well as I think number as well. I have to look into those papers. Potentially, yeah. I think fasting has multiple benefits. I think it's not just about lowering glucose and insulin. There's many other benefits. How much of this does or doesn't apply to gliomas? Well, in theory, it all applies to all cancer, right? Because all cancer relies on glucose and glutamine. I think maybe the better question would be how much of these compounds cross the blood-brain barrier. And I had a client that I did a consult with, And the question was basically that, like, do any of these compounds cross the blood-brain barrier? And a lot of them do. I don't know about thymus vulgaris, like in this betulinic acid, but many other things do, like curcumin and quercetin and all these like do cross the blood-brain barrier. Yes, the spice thyme. Obviously, I don't think that the raw plant would have these kind of effects, because these are like, extracts of very specific compounds within thyme, like thymol, and like in this case, we're talking about betulinic acid. But yeah, ultimately it is a natural compounds from the thyme plant. Yeah, so they do have dysfunctional mitochondria. They do. Yep, they do. I hope that explanation helped, understanding that there's no question that there's damaged mitochondria, and by putting extra electrons through a damaged mitochondria, you're going to create a bunch of oxidative stress, because if you go back to like way back towards like some of the earlier mitochondrial videos that I did, even something as simple as like the cristae, like how tight the cristae are, how affect a lot of things, or how much intact cardiolipin is in a mitochondrial cristae, and intermitochondrial membrane affects the cristae formation. It also affects the supercomplex formation, and the supercomplex, if it's not formed, then there's a much more like leaking of reactive oxygen species, or and so supercomplex formation is important. And so like you can understand that if there's no cristae at all, the supercomplexes are not going to be formed. There's going to be leaking a ton of reactive oxygen species. You're not going to make any energy at all. And therefore, you're going to actually get the benefits of having broken mitochondria. You're going to use the broken mitochondria against the cancer. If MRI showed no evidence of cancer, would fenbendazole or HPOT be worthwhile eradicating anything that is lurking while fasting? That is a question for your doctor, but I don't know the answer to that. I mean, I don't think that if it was me, I think it would be a nuanced question, because how long have you been NED for? When can you take your foot off the gas? Those are all really good questions. I don't think we have figured out yet, but I definitely wouldn't go back to my lifestyle that led to the cancer. This is where I think that I'm going to have and I'll be talking about, of course, on the course, or on the channel as well, but I'm gonna have a course called How Did I Get Cancer? And it's going to be a deep dive into like how cancer, forms and what drives those processes, kind of in a more digestible format than like, 15 or 20 videos, but, or maybe even more than 20 videos. But my point is that the key, I think, that is missing from all of this is that, an ounce of prevention is worth more than a pound of cure, right? So what I would say is I would go back to the drawing board and say, what in my environment, what in my life has led to this problem? And, with a little bit of like humility, and with a little bit of like open-mindedness, and probably a really like open-minded and humble doctor as well, in your local area, you guys can find a lot of things in your history. Like, just because I do this on a regular basis, I do these, educational consults, and I do patient consults. And then of course I've been a doctor and I work at the hospital, just got off last night. And I see the story playing out, and almost everybody's story plays out, even with minimal investigation of how this happened. So I would just want to make sure that I looked at all the things that were driving that process and removing them from my life. And then, let me give you a for instance. It's going to hopefully apply to your question. There's a therapy called deuterium depletion therapy. And what they recommend, an overview of what they recommend, is they recommend, being on deuterium depletion therapy for a period of time until you're NED. And then when you get to NED status, then they have you do like a pulse of deuterium depletion therapy for like 1 to 3 months per year, right? No matter if you're healthy or not, right? As a way to help maintain the benefits. So what I'd say is it's probably maybe something like that, where maybe like 1 to 3 months of the year, maybe I would do something like more extreme, where I would be on kind of like a press pulse, or something like that. Maybe not the full press pulse, because that could be expensive and maybe unnecessary. But I could see that, like, where you kind of like, you're not on 24/7 for 365, but perhaps you're on for another, for a longer period of time, for a shorter period of time, excuse me. Yeah, the molecular hydrogen story, like I don't have enough information about it. I know that my mentor, Dr. Jack Cruz, is pretty bearish on it, just because you can't control for the deuterium content of the hydrogen. If you were using a molecular hydrogen machine with deuterium depleted water, I probably could be on board. But if you were using just tap water or like just RO water with 150 parts per million deuterium, I don't know if I'd be on board with that. All right, let's get back to these studies here. Okay, so we talked about betulinic acid and how it has effects double the strength of Dawn, and we talked about how. Okay, we were down further. My bad. All right, so we're talking about this. We're talking about the Chinese persimmon leaves that induce, apoptosis and oxidative stress, mitochondrial apoptosis. And I wanted to talk about some other compounds that were found within the same plant's leaves, right, that have strong effects on the GLS enzyme. And they studied three. They studied this rutogenic acid, barbinervic acid, as well as some other compound. I'm sorry, uracilic acid, and then the other two. I messed up. And so what they looked at was how it compared against Dawn, right? And it showed that compounds 2 and 3 showed higher activities against the glutaminase enzyme than Dawn. So in this plant, we have 2 compounds that are actually stronger than Dawn. It didn't give the micromolar concentrations like it did on the first paper, but needless to say, we have 2 additional natural compounds and this barbinervic acid as well as this rotogenic acid. And I did some simple searches on Dr. Google, and I was not able to find really any available compounds. How do I say this? Available supplementation that have these compounds in them. If somebody was able to find them, I'd be happy to know about them and know about their existence, but I couldn't find them. I think these are pretty obscure compounds. So therefore, no one has, commercialized this or, made extracts of this. Maybe like fresh leaves or fresh leaf, like kind of like a essential oil could be an option for something like that. And that maybe could something you could do at home if you have access to this plant. However, that being said, I have seen a supplement that is containing the betulinic acid. And it's only one supplement. I didn't put it on here just because I'm not trying to commercialize this page. But that being said, there is a supplement that is pure betulinic acid that I think could be beneficial adding in as a strategy to block glutaminase for certain patients and for certain kind of conditions. If you didn't have access to Dawn, or if Dawn was too expensive, or I have plenty of people who have access to Dawn and they have the money to pay for it, but it's not in line with their value system. They're like, I don't want to take a medication. I'd rather do it naturally. Or I have a lower, grade, lower, seriousness situation. Maybe they have a DCIS that was removed, and there's no evidence of disease, and they're just like looking to kind of do like a short press pulse, but they don't want to use medications, which I can completely understand, in those kind of situations. Or maybe you have a colon cancer and it was like a, more of a in situ situation, and they were able to, remove it, with a partial colectomy or whatnot. And there was no evidence of, disease in the lymph nodes, and they weren't even offered chemotherapy or radiation. And they were just looking at doing something that was beneficial for their health, but they weren't ready to go and use Dawn. I think that these kind of compounds could be helpful. But remember, even though betulinic acid has double the strength of Dawn, we have now uncovered several compounds, even today, curcumin and berberine, that have effects against the GLS enzyme and can easily dovetail into a multiple modality approach of how to affect the glutaminase system. I think I'll probably end on this. Okay. So what I would say is that kind of like it was alluded to during the paper of the new press pulse paper, the one that came out on December 5th, the Diraj, et al. / Seafried paper. There is no, well, I won't say it so matter of factly. What I'd say is there's probably no silver bullet, right? There is no like one thing you can take to be healed. Although I would love to believe that would be true, and I'm open to believing it if I could see it, and studied as well as in real life. But that being said, I think more likely it's going to take a combination approach, and that's exactly what the Seafried paper and Diraj paper said as well. It's going to take a combination approach at affecting these various systems, and it's going to take, you're going to have like a stepwise approach or stepwise, killing off phase of these tumors. And that's, if you go back to the classic press pulse graph, it's about pulses, and you're managing the disease and lowering your disease burden with time. And I think that these compounds should be used in combination. Like I was pretty upset when they didn't. They had the study, right? They had it right here in front of us, where they showed this paper here. I'm still a little upset about this, because what would it have taken? They already had all this stuff in one study. Like, could they not have just done a test tube with the cancer cells or with this GDH activity, where they combined quercetin and EGCG? And you may say, well, what are we going to see? Well, remember this study here where they took iron and Aristin, and like we saw Aristin have almost no effect at 8 hours, and we saw iron have almost no effect at 24 hours. And then like when we added iron plus Aristin, we see like an unbelievable synergistic effect. We're talking like probably like 5% viability from 100%. Like there is a huge amount of synergy here that is not being studied in these papers and in these labs. And it's kind of like part of this old, how do I say it? There's a saying, a pill for every ill, right? And it's kind of part of this old strategy of looking at one thing, and you wanted to find that one compound so you can maybe then create a drug that's like that compound and then sell it as a blockbuster. And I think that, moving forward in the new medicine that we're trying to create, where we don't necessarily like care if it's one thing or if it's 10 things, as long as it's safe and it is effective and it like has synergy with itself and it makes sense scientifically. So I would love to see more studies where these groups, do a study like this, but then they have like maybe 3 or 4 compounds and one that all have activity on the same enzyme or a variety of enzymes, and show cell viability or gene expression or activity against these certain enzymes, and see what is the synergistic effect on these systems when you combine these compounds that you would, in a normal, when you eat thyme, you're getting thymol, you're also getting this betulinic acid, you're also getting the other compounds. What happens when you take that as a whole versus just one compound? I think that would be nice to see. Let's see here. Look at a couple of these. Oh my God, this is like preaching to the choir. We must not abandon prior lifestyle. We must abandon prior lifestyles. The goal should not be getting healthy enough to go back to horrific living, should it? It's your choice. You're a free person. You can do what you want. I think it would be irresponsible and silly. I don't want to use any other more derogatory language towards that, but I personally couldn't wrap my head around that. If you were to have the perfect press pulse protocol and like eradicate your tumor, and you were in an NED situation, and then you go back to the same lifestyle that caused it, I think that would be at minimum irresponsible. But I also believe in patient autonomy, and people can do what they want. I just don't think it's a good idea. Yeah, I'm open to any kind of like other pulses of ROS. I think that makes sense. One thing that I've kind of touched on a couple of times is ozone therapy. Ozone has a lot of potential as being an effective oxidative stressor for cancer cells, but it's just not highly studied in cancer. But mechanistically, it makes a lot of sense, and I think that those and other things, could be helpful. Another thing I haven't talked about, but I will talk about, I'll have a whole video on it, is photodynamic therapy. And photodynamic therapy is the same kind of like mechanism of how, unlocking PDK, and increasing reactive oxygen species within damaged mitochondria and inhibiting them and improving. Yep, photobiomodulation. That's what I'm talking about. Photobiomodulation is part of the photodynamic therapy, and exactly what it does. In normal cells, it will actually increase ROS to a point, as well as mitochondrial activity within healthy mitochondria, and that small amount of ROS can actually retrograde signal back to the nucleus, increase PGC1 alpha, improve mitochondrial performance, measures, but within cancer cells, because they don't have intact, mitochondria, it actually kills them. So pretty cool. Let's see here. A couple other things here. Why do we need to pulse it if we can kill it all at once? Well, the reason for the pulse wasn't because we couldn't kill it all at once, is because we didn't want to kill us at the same time, right? So the reason for the pulse, at least in Dr. Seyfried's eyes, is because, again, they're using drugs, right? They're using Dawn, which have kind of an all or nothing way of doing it. And so you're going to have significant side effects, peripheral, collateral effects. And obviously, it's kind of like chemotherapy. Like, if chemotherapy can kill all the cancer cells, but it kills you in the same process, like, what's the point? So I think the key is just minimizing side effects and minimizing, collateral effects that can damage you. That's the reason for the pulses. I'm sorry about your toilet issues with ivermectin and Fenben. Yeah, I mean, it makes sense, right? Because melatonin, although it's a very powerful antioxidant, actually increases ROS within damaged mitochondria and creates the same thing as DCA or high dose thiamine, all those. Yeah, I mean, everybody's gonna have different side effects with different medications. This is why it's important to work with a practitioner, honestly. Like, find someone local who maybe they don't know everything about press pulse, maybe they don't know everything about cancers of mitochondrial metabolic disease, but they're open-minded, they're integrative, they're functional. They can order some labs to help you out to make sure you're not causing any harm. Is there anything to deuterium depleted water? Yes, I do believe there is. Yeah, and I'm gonna do a whole, probably live stream or video on it, because deuterium depletion therapy there is something to it. The mechanism for me is a little bit murky, but there is something to it, and in studies have been shown to like double lifespan of like pancreatic cancer patients. And what the nice thing about it is it dovetails nicely into ketogenic metabolic therapy. That's the thing. It's cool. Like, if it's cool, but it like derails metabolic therapy, like, I'm not generally on board. But if it's something that dovetails into metabolic therapy and enhances metabolic therapy, or works alongside metabolic therapy, like, I'm on board with those. And matter of fact, in my course on how to implement metabolic therapy, that's why I like digress into so many other things, and because there's so many things that can dovetail into metabolic therapy that's not covered in press pulse, in the press pulse papers, because they're looking at keto, they're looking at fasting, looking at ketones, they're looking at MCT oils, they're looking at Dawn and other things, but they're not looking at the whole gestalt of what we have access to. Nebulizing NMN? No, I've never heard of nebulizing NMN. I mean, I know what NMN is. I think the jury's still out of whether NMN could be helpful in cancer or harmful in cancer. My gut tells me it's probably helpful, but I haven't seen studies on it. Is this for blood sugar control for prediabetes? I'm not really sure. Thank you, Mark. I'm not really sure what. I'm sorry, I'm getting too many comments. I'm trying to keep up with them. Sorry, you guys. I'm not really sure, Epic Jeff, what you're talking about, unless you had a question earlier up about blood sugar control for prediabetes. In terms of like betulinic acid, and we're talking about glutamine here. Now, a lot of these compounds, quercetin, EGCG, berberine, have effects on glucose. So I'm not sure. I mean, these have multiple effects. We haven't even had a chance to talk about glucose, you guys. We are still in a series that I think that I asked a question like maybe 2 or 3 months ago. Would you guys want to hear about glutamine or glucose inhibition? And I completely shifted my goals of hitting glucose next, and I went to glutamine, and now we've been through this giant series on glutamine, and I think that we're pretty much finished with the glutamine side of things for now. I would, if I learn more things or things, new information pops up on my radar, I'll be happy to share it and show how it fits into the glutaminolysis system. But I think we're pretty much finished up. But I'd like to hit glucose next. So hopefully a lot of those questions will be answered. Yeah. So we haven't really covered a lot of the stuff for glutamine or glucose here and how it can affect prediabetes. But a lot of these compounds have effects on glucose, as well as photobiomodulation that Laura, photobiomodulation or PBM or low-level laser therapy, or I'm sure there's another name that I've somehow forgot, but is another name for red light therapy, which is another name for another black box of what does that mean? Well, does that mean full spectrum photobiomodulation like you would see like on a sauna space bulb from 600 nanometers all the way to 3000 nanometers? Or is that some very specific wavelengths that you would see from an LED or laser? Generally, PBM is talking about LEDs or lasers at a very specific wavelength, like 650, like 670, like 810, 830, 850. Those kind of like wavelengths are generally what's considered photobiomodulation. But I think it's such a new, new field of study, that I think that we're going to learn a lot more with time, as time goes on, with what that technically means. But photobiomodulation is a powerful strategy to help mitochondria. There is some like conflicting literature whether or not photobiomodulation can actually help cancer grow, and it's a completely hypothetical like question. Are we helping cancer grow by increasing ATP? And although the definitive evidence has not been done, I'm telling you mechanistically it does not make sense, because the mitochondria of cancer cells are broken. So you're actually going to increase ROS, which is exactly how photodynamic therapy works. It increases ROS within cancer cells and kills cancer cells preferentially, whereas the photosynthesizer plus PBM, yes, it is biphasic, although I think there's still a lot to learn with that too. There's still a lot to learn with PBM. Let's be honest. Like if you listen to people who are really into PBM or photobiomodulation, like, and then you listen to like let's say a Glenn Jeffrey or a Scott Zimmerman, Glenn Jeffrey's a physicist, but Scott Zimmerman's a light engineer. I mean, just type in Scott Zimmerman photobiomodulation and like watch some of his lectures. He is very, very smart, and he is a light engineer. So he understands like linear and nonlinear optics, and how light affects the body is unbelievable. I mean, I cannot stress how unbelievable photobiomodulation and how light is, which is why I've been studying under Jack Kruse for so many years, because I'm so intrigued by how other physical forces, not a pill, not something you put in your mouth, like a diet, or what you don't put in your diet, like fasting, how many other important things we can do for our health that have nothing to do with what we put in our mouth. All right, we've gone about an hour, and we've pretty much nailed the new compounds that I wanted to share: the betulinic acid and the two compounds from the Chinese persimmon leaves. And I hope that somebody out there, some entrepreneur is able to start to commercialize the compounds from the leaves of the persimmon plant, but also give us some extra options for supplements for the betulinic acid, because that's very promising. Those are very promising things that are out there that are natural and stronger than, the prototypic glutaminase inhibitor Dawn, that is extremely expensive, difficult to obtain, has more side effects. I think would be really good for this market to, provide and allow patients to have access to these things. And practitioners like myself, I would love to have access to them too. So with that, I will close today's live stream. I wish everybody a Merry Christmas. And I probably won't have a live stream Thursday just because it's Christmas week. But I'll try to be back next Monday for another episode. And I think we'll probably start to talk about glucose and its inhibition, both uptake and utilization, but also its bloodstream availability. Until next time, if you like videos like this, please like, share, subscribe. If you have people in your life that could use this information, please share it with them. And until next time.